I'll call this meeting of the Waco ISD Board of Trustees to order. A quorum is present, and tonight we are all in person. There's no video conference. However, the meeting is available as a video and audio conference in accordance with the Governor's suspension of certain open meeting requirements to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify. Members of the public may attend this meeting in person or watch it live on Waco ISD TV and online on wacoisd.org/live. 2, members of the public attending in person may sign up to offer public comments on an agenda item, as is our normal practice. 3, members of the public who are not attending in person were instructed to submit their comments in writing to Joshua Wucher last night by 10 o'clock. Members of the board, no, I don't have to read that, we're all here. And all items to be discussed or voted upon have been posted in accordance with state law. If you have any questions about the suspended open meeting requirements, please contact the Office of the Attorney General by calling 888-672-6787 or by emailing toma@oag.org.gov. I will be so happy when I do not have to read all that. Welcome. And we're getting close, right? Tonight's the first night that we're sitting here as opposed to being on the floor and on the dais. And so that's exciting. And without masks, we're vaccinated, and CDC issued guidance just this morning that if you are vaccinated, there's no longer the need to wear a mask indoors or outdoors. So, very exciting. Yay. So yes, those of you who are vaccinated, be my guest. I'm so pleased to see you all here tonight. It really warms my heart to see so many people excited about Waco ISD and being engaged and here to welcome new board members. That is, we have not had a room full of people, and at least, I mean, pre-COVID, this is almost like COVID might be almost over. So it's really exciting. Thank you so much. I see some dignitaries here tonight. I saw City Councilwoman Barefield. She walked in with me. I see Commissioner Pat Miller here. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have any other. And we have former trustee Norman Manning here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Manning, for coming. I may have missed some because we do have a crowd, and my apologies if I did. I'm sorry? Oh, where is Dr. Rowe? Hi. Good to see you. Thank you. Okay, so let's do the honors. Next item on our agenda is oath of office. Mr. Wucher.
I need 3 of them.
We're going in height order.
No, put Stephanie in the middle. All right. Oh, I'm trying to get out of everybody's way. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, the Constitution of the State of Texas provides that before an elected officer may assume office, they are required to take the oath of office. As a notary public, I'm honored to have the privilege to administer the oath of office to you at this time. Please raise your right hand. In the name and the authority of the state of Texas, please repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Jeremy Davis,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties
that I will faithfully execute the duties
of the Office of Trustees of the Waco Independent School District
of the Office of Trustees of the Waco Independent School District
of the State of Texas,
of the State of Texas,
and will to the best of my ability
and will to the best of my ability
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution
and laws of the United States and of this state.
and laws of the United States and of this state.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you very much, and congratulations.
At this time, the board is going to take a couple of pictures before we adjourn into closed session. Let's see, I think I'll just go ahead and adjourn us into closed session so I don't have to come back up. After our photos, the board will go into closed session pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, to discuss personnel. And we will be returning, but I don't know exactly when, so sometime after 7 for sure. You're all welcome to stay. We're back from closed session where no action was taken. We appreciate everyone's patience, and I'm really impressed by your dedication to Waco ISD at this point at 8:35. Next item on the agenda is to consider, discuss, and take appropriate action regarding reorganization of the board. And at this time, item A is President of the Board of Trustees, and as the President of the Board of Trustees, I'm going to turn that one over to Mr. Sykes. Mr. Sykes.
Thank you, Madam President. At this time on the agenda, we are set to consider our reorganization, and our first step in that process is to receive nominations for the position of Board President of Waco ISD Board of Trustees. So at this time, I'll receive nominations for that position. Mr. Dupuy?
I'll nominate Angela Tikel for the office of president.
Nominated for Angela Tikel.
I'll nominate Angela Tikel for the office of president.
Right.
You get recorded that time?
Pardon me?
I didn't have my...
Oh, okay. You're done. Or talk louder next time. Okay.
It's been 10 years.
Okay. All right. We have a nomination for the board president. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, I'll proceed to vote.
I want to make a nomination. I'm going to nominate Stephanie Quarterwig for president of the board.
Okay. Okay. We have two nominations, Ms. Tikel and Ms. Quarterwig. At this time, if there's no other nominations, we'll proceed to vote. We'll need a roll call vote. Okay. Not for nominations. Okay. Yeah. So at this time, I'll take a roll call vote for Angela Tikel as president of the WISD Board of Trustees.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing against Stephanie.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe that's a 6-1? 5-1, excuse me. Thank you for the correction. So at that time, we would congratulate Ms. Tikel for being elected to another term on WISD's Board of President of WISD's Board of Trustees.
Before we move to the next item, I just want to say that I continue to be humbled by the board's trust in my ability to lead the board and serve in this capacity. I take the the responsibility very seriously and earnestly, and perhaps too much, because I think I'd sleep better at night if I didn't. But I'm honored to serve as a member of the board and, of course, to continue in my work with Waco ISD. So at this time, I'll entertain motions for Vice President of the Board of Trustees. Nominations.
I'll nominate Alan Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Dupuy. Are there any other nominations?
Madam President,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dupuy, I appreciate your nomination for me as Vice President, but at this time, I would like to remove my name from the nomination. And the reason is I want to nominate Stephanie Quarterweek as Vice President of the Board.
Okay.
You're too old for the job, then.
I couldn't say that, but you can.
Okay, so
I couldn't say that, but you can.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a nomination for Ms. Quarterwig as
You've done a
Vice
very good
President
job through the years, I should add.
of the Board of Trustees. Are there any other nominations? Okay, Ms. McCutcheon, will you do another roll? Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye. Yes.
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 Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And I want to say that you will be missed as that person that I call to tell you you're up, and because I knew I could always depend on you. You're loyal. You're such a stalwart believer and just a staunch supporter of the district, and your service in this capacity has been really appreciated, and I appreciate the support you've provided me the last couple of years.
Enjoyed working with you, enjoyed working with all the board members, and continue that work as well.
Very good. Next, Secretary of the Board of Trustees. I'll entertain a nomination for Secretary.
I'll nominate Jose Vidania.
Nomination for Mr. Vidanias. Anyone else wish to make a nomination?
Sit there and let him do that. Jose.
Okay. I feel like we probably don't need a roll call. So I'll ask the board, all those in favor of Jose Vidania serving as Secretary of the Board of Trustees, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That's what I thought. Thank you. Thank you for Mr. Vidania.
Thank you.
I think that was an agreement to serve in that capacity, and appreciate that. The board officers are members of the Audit Committee, and we work with our internal auditor. But otherwise, just watch out for each other and serve in the event the other is unable. So thanks, everyone, and thanks, everyone, for your patience in waiting for us to have our meeting in closed session. It's my understanding that there are no public comments. Is that correct, Mr. Butcher? Okay. And next is the consent agenda. There are two items on the consent agenda. No one asked that either item be pulled for further discussion. However, I would certainly entertain the motion to pull either item if you would like more information about either. If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Dupuy. Thank you, Mr. Davis. All those in favor of the consent agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Sturzinger, thank you. Thank you for being patient with us, and my apologies for the late hour.
Good evening. evening, members of the board. Thank you for having me here tonight. Looking forward to giving you a construction update here for Paul Tyson Field. So this is a project, I'll say, long time coming along the way. And it's been a while since we had the opportunity to get in front of you. So thought I'd start with a little recap, a little bit of how we got here today. So as we look at the first slide here, the big gesture here, if you'll go to the next one, is the partnership that was created between McLennan County, City of Waco, and Waco ISD. And that really focused around the shift to support the venue project, the shift to Paul Tyson, and in addition, the acquisition of what is Lake Air Little League on the north side of the property. So for this project, the big picture concept is we're taking Paul Tyson from where it was at, and we're actually shifting it onto the Waco High School property. And so what does that look like? As we look at the next slide, we went through several months of planning with the Waco High School team, with the athletic director, to really talk about the strategies. And ultimately, I identified one big one is that the track and field is used by the most number of students at Waco High School. So locating that actually on the property was the best opportunity to keep students safe and secure within the property. And instead of using the parcel that was picked up to the northwest or the top left of this image for track and field, we identified that would be used for baseball, softball practice fields. So in this scenario, we're currently went through the design process and now into construction for a new track, artificial turf field, 2,000 seats. There's a ticket restroom concession building, and all that is located at the northwest of the main property of Waco High School, and ultimately we decided on that because that created flexibility for the future. As we looked at 10 to 15 years down the road, that created opportunities to make sure the rest of the site was freed as much as possible for future development on the site. We additionally were able to include a practice field within the design. As Paul Tyson comes offline, there are currently 2 structures that are there supporting locker rooms. So we had to create a new home for those students and those student athletes within the existing building. So we're doing some light renovations there. With the future development, potentially Lake Air Little League, but we have the baseball, softball field there on the top left, as I mentioned before. As we look to phasing on the next slide, is pretty simple here is that we're starting construction immediately, which is underway on the track and field, as well as the baseball, softball field. And then you'll see a little blue square there in the center is that's waiting until the summer of 21, which is almost upon us here, to be able to support the transition of students into the interior locker rooms. And ultimately, if you recall, then the right are the images of what that would look like, the top image being the front door that you would see from Trice and 44th, and then the bottom one actually from inside the facility. So where are we at today? And so as we move into construction, the contractor has been moving forward. They were approved in the February board meeting, given notice to proceed in March, and have been moving forward in construction. So if you want to go forward 2 slides here, you're able to see the progress. So this is actually an aerial image. It's actually taken from a Waco High School staff member who has a little interest in drone photography. So we were very appreciative to get the big picture, quite literally. So this is sitting over the existing Paul Tyson field, looking out over the fairground parking, and you see then Paul Tyson, the new Paul Tyson there in the distance. If we move forward 1 slide, we really get a sense of the scope and scale there. So here in the bottom left, you'll see a little square. That would be the new entry and ticket concession restroom building. So that would be the main locale for individuals to come in who are coming in for game day, be able to visit the facility. So directly on the left side against Trice would be the location of the grandstands. And then clearly you can see the oval of the track and the football field that was in place. As we talk about construction, we talk about these details. Right now, the contractor is just finishing up the pad prep for the site. So as you think about it, a track and football field is a little over 100,000 square feet. They're roughly digging out several feet to put back select fill in there. Similarly, on the baseball field, there's another 100,000 square feet. Softball field's about 50,000 square feet. So there's been a lot of dirt and earthwork that has been moving in and out of that site. Because ultimately what we're looking for is what we call potential vertical rise which is limiting the vertical movement of the track and field, and we've seen fields with issues with that before. Ultimately, we're trying to provide a good long-term investment for Waco ISD that's really sound and not getting the movement that you can see in cracking and heaving in the facility. So that's the track and field and football field. As you go to the next slide, you get a sense then of the baseball softball field. So in this case, we are now looking north. So the football field would be to our right, kind of back right on this image. And you'd see the baseball field first. The little kind of triangle is a detention pond. And then in the far distance is the softball field. So the backs or the home plates of those two fields will be adjacent to each other with a central restroom facility, storage facility to support those students on site. There is a connection then that'll be by the county as that continues to develop as well from that side. So not only are we looking at the large development here, but as we look at the next slide, we're working with a contractor to work through all the minutia and details, talking about utilities on site, talking about how we're working through the construction details, addressing submittals, RFIs, and ultimately making sure that they're making the progress that they need. Right now, we are looking at a few details to make sure they're staying on target with the schedule. So that's addressing elements like we often hear impacts due to COVID and just materials and resources. We're hearing that kind of as an industry right now, and as well any rain delays that are coming in. So we're making sure they're following the letter of the law of the contract, making sure they're following up, and ultimately delivering the field. I think the simple summary for the board is right now we're looking on budget and on time for the schedule at the end of the day. So things are looking good. With that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
Madam President. Jared, just one small comment that the aerial doesn't show. The baseball, softball practice fields, it does show parking configuration. Is there parking over there? It doesn't look like you're moving any dirt on that as far as the aerial goes.
I'd have to go back and look at the exact detail. I believe we ended up with a small parking lot to start.
Okay.
Because we knew that some people would ultimately drive there and they'd
Sure.
need a place to park. But
Sure.
again, this was a practice field, ultimate development, and there was a lot of discussion as well with the county about shared parking as
Absolutely.
well regionally.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear that we're on budget because this is a difficult time for availability of materials as well as cost of materials. So I'm hoping our timeline will hold up for not delayed due to delay of materials, and certainly hope we stay on budget. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we're on target with that right now.
Yep, we are too.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any questions?
Mrs. President.
Yes, Ms. Cordaway.
I'll say also, I am very encouraged that we're on budget because I've heard of the cost of materials for construction has gone up exponentially. So I'm glad to hear we're on target on that. And in the timeline, because that's typically not what you hear about buildings and construction, is that, the scheduled timeline is correct, so.
And I would just, two elaborations on that is when the contractor signs the contract, in this case for roughly $9 million, that we hold them to that, making sure that that's what they're getting for the price paid, that it's agreed up front and there aren't the changes. And same thing with schedules. They have a contracted start date and end date, and we make sure that they're making the progress they need to hit that along the way. So,
Well, thank you for following up with that. I appreciate
absolutely.
Anybody else have a question? No? Okay. While you're here, I just want to thank you again for your work on the community, or on our long-range facility planning committee. I continue to hear compliments about your work, and I had a conversation today, and he said, "Man, that Jared Sterzinger, what good work." So we appreciate you so much, and thank you for your work. And we've got one more community advisory committee meeting, right? May 24th. Okay.
Week and a half.
Yeah. Anybody have a question before we let him go? Okay. Safe travels. Thank you. Thank you. Next on. Yes, I am going to move. Next, Mr. Traylor, thank you also for your patience with us You're here to discuss our updated bond capacity analysis, which actually a good segue from the Community Advisory Committee and our work. And there's so many things that we want to do, and kind of depends on a lot on bond capacity, right?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Again, for the record, my name is Dusty Traylor, Managing Director with RBC Capital Markets. We have the honor and privilege of serving Waco ISD as financial advisor. It's great to see everybody tonight. I think our presentation is loaded electronically. Very good. So this is an update. Many of you have seen kind of the bones of this presentation previously. We have made some updates to the capacity, but I do think it's probably beneficial to walk through a lot of the beginning just for everyone's benefit on the board. I think any time that we talk about bonding capacity, it's always kind of good to start at what is the district's current bond position, what's the economy look like, and also a little bit of what some of the results around the state for bond elections have been. So if we go to just inside the cover page here, we've got a page that just shows what the historical bond election results have been for Texas school districts. And on average, going back to 2016, 72.46% of the propositions put forth by Texas school districts have been passed by voters. And if we look at those propositions on a value basis, on the dollar amount of the vote, 84% of bond elections put forth by Texas school districts have been successful going back to 2016. And then if we look at just this most recent election, the May election, 80% of the propositions put forth by districts passed. And if we look at it on a par amount basis or dollar amount basis, 92% of those elections were successful. So Texas voters have a strong history of supporting school districts and their capital needs. And if you'll also turn over here, as I mentioned, I think it's always good to start when we're talking about capacity. Where's our current bond position? What's our current bond portfolio look like? The district's current bond portfolio stands at a principal amount of $141.44 million. Now that's paid down quite a bit over the history of the bonds. The district's done a great job of paying down that principal amount over time. And one thing that you're going to see is if you look at the graphs down at the lower portion of the page, those graphs represent the district's annual debt service payments on your existing bonds. And you'll notice that those annual debt service payments are approximately around $14 million per year. However, it is important to note that we've got a nice amount of bonds paying off, and in 2023, that annual debt service payment is going to fall to approximately $10 million. So we're going to see about a $4 million decrease in our annual payment. That ties in very nicely with the district considering a capital improvement program to potentially be voted here in the near term, because likely the first payments on that bond program would not begin until that 2023 fiscal year, where you have that nice drop to slide in some additional bonds. So you're set up very, very well to take advantage of that. And that drives a lot of potential bonding capacity without a need for, a lot of this is you're able to do without a need for a tax rate increase, but there's some that we'll need. The very next page just looks at what's our tax rate look like compared to some of our neighbors, some of our Central Texas neighbors. So what we have here is your current total tax rate compared to Midway, Belton, Temple, China Spring, Robinson, La Vega, and then yourselves. Obviously, the district's tax rate right now is $1.264 per $100 valuation. That really falls towards the lower side of these peer districts that we have nearby. And I would say it's important to note, I think, number one, China Spring recently had a bond election. It's likely that INS tax rate is going to go up. I think they predicted about a 12-cent increase with their election. And I think there are a couple of other districts on the map here that are considering bond elections maybe around the same time you guys are as well. So their INS tax rates could be going up as well. You know, the next page we look at, I know that we've talked about this previously, but I think it's always important to talk about because this also drives your capacity here. Waco ISD has previously been a very good steward with the bonded money that the district's had. And going back to 2013, the district has refinanced existing bonds 5 separate times. Those 5 separate refinancings have resulted in debt service savings totaling approximately $41.1 million over the remaining life of those bonds. On a present value basis, that's about $33 million of present value savings to district taxpayers, or 12.23%. So it's a good history there to note that the district, any time that you've gone out to issue bonds, you've always taken an opportunity when it presents itself to refinance those bonds to lower those payments. And I would expect that trend to continue with this district and this board. Also, a key component of driving bond capacity is looking at the district's tax base. Currently, the district's tax base is about $6.9 billion. That tax base, if you'll look on this page, has increased over the course of the past 10 years at a rate of about 5.8%. Over the course of the past 5 years, it's increased at a rate of about 6.5%. So we actually utilize a little bit of expectation for some growth in that tax base in our capacity model. Another thing I think it's important to point out here, like being good stewards in refinancing, you've also been good stewards in bringing down that tax rate over time. And if we look over the course of the past few years, you brought the tax rate down from $1.41 down to what is now $1.264. So the district has reduced that tax rate as well. So then we get into this page just kind of looks at the assumptions that we used when we put together the analysis for the various scenarios that we ran. So a lot of us, we've talked about these assumptions previously. We build off of the assumption of the district's current INS tax rate, 22.415 cents. We build off the district's current net of frozen tax base, which is $6.47 billion per McLennan County CAD. And then we've assumed that in the next fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year, that our tax base would remain steady. We have seen a preliminary value that indicates minimal growth there, and there's some thought that growth could potentially go away by the time the chief appraiser certifies this, and that's largely a function of the year that we're in. We're in this COVID year, and I think they're being conservative there. So some of the adjustments that we've made going forward is in the future couple of fiscal years, we've assumed that tax base growth picks back up again to the tune of about 5% per year for 3 years. And then, of course, we also assume that we use your frozen values for the tax base, so we have to assume that there is some levy coming back off of frozens. We pull that back into our analysis at $900,000 per year. You've always done a nice job of collecting your taxes. We assume a 98% collection rate. That is very much in line with the district's historical averages. Then we also have to use some level of interest rates when we're running these scenarios. And in order to run these scenarios, we use current market rates plus approximately 1.15% in order to be conservative, because we're not talking about issuing bonds tonight. You know, even if you were to have a bond election, you would have that bond election at the earliest would be November. You probably would not talk about your first issuance of those bonds until sometime after the first of the year in 2022. A lot can happen in the economy. I think we've all seen recently, and interest rates could change. And so we've built a little bit of conservatism into our interest rate assumptions. So the 5 analysis that we ran this evening were, what could we do? What's our capacity if we had 0 INS tax rate increase? What's the impact of $250 million? What's the impact of $300 million? What's the impact of $350 million? And then what's the impact of $375 million? So you can see here from the graph, we can do without an INS tax rate increase approximately $152.775 million. then the $250 million scenario would increase our INS tax rate to approximately 4.9, or by 4.97 cents. The $300 million would increase it by 7.85 cents, and then 350 would be about 11.33 cents, and then 375 million would be just under 12.5 cents per $100 valuation. So the next slide, I think it's more important to look at not necessarily what that rate is, but how does it impact the ratepayer, the homeowner. And so we picked the district's average home value, which has a taxable value of $117,499, and we looked at how these scenarios would impact that homeowner. And the graph that I'm really going to draw to your attention this evening is the graph at the bottom right, which looks at the average monthly impact. Because the way I look at that, I think the way most homeowners look at an increase is, you know, people are paying their bills on a monthly basis. So how do you impact me on a monthly basis? So obviously scenario 1 has no monthly impact at a 0-cent increase. Scenario 2, $250 million, is $4.87 per month. Scenario 3, the $300 million, is approximately $7.69 per month. Then scenario 4, $350 million, is $11.09 per month. And then scenario 5, $375 million for $12.23 per month. I think the punchline here is it's safe to say that what you're looking at here, while we're talking about large dollar amounts, we really boil it down to what it actually costs the average ratepayer. You're talking about something less than a takeout pizza per month on all of these proposals. So the pages that follow in the presentation get down into the real detail of each and every spreadsheet. I know you guys have had a long night. I don't know that we necessarily need to get into the nitty-gritty of each of those spreadsheets. They are there for your reference, and if you do have any questions on those, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
We're negotiating who's going to ask the first question.
Okay. We need a coin to flip.
Mr. Sykes.
Need a coin to flip.
Dusty, thank you for your presentation. Certainly pointing towards the $41 million of savings, and if I'm reading it correctly, $33 million in present value savings is a significant number. And we're very pleased that we've been in a position to enable to do that with your assistance and your expertise in that area. Rolling forward, and your remarks are very clear in terms of the scenarios that you've mapped out for us. It's very clear in that regard. Asking if you would maybe provide some insight as to the market rates in your reference. Our timing is good. We recognize the timing, but there's also some volatile bond markets that are impacting potentially those rates.
Yes, sir.
Do you see that the conservative 115 basis point increase as an adequate level based on what we're seeing in the market? Are you doing that with other bond projections, or is that kind of is it realistic, I guess, from a conservative standpoint?
I think it's a great question, and I do feel like the 115 basis points is a conservative enough estimate of increases in rates. Now, listen, I'm not a prognosticator.
Yeah, I've asked you to nail the rates before, and you haven't answered that question.
My crystal ball sometimes is busted, but this is the level of cushion that we're using in other places.
Okay.
For bonds that are being considered to be sold that far in advance. And if you look in the scenarios that we've laid out here, as you'll recall, we actually looked at a portion of these bonds being issued in early 22 and a portion being issued in 2023. So we do need to build that conservatism in there. For instance, if you were talking about if we had the opportunity to issue bonds in August, right? We just had a May election and we were talking about issuing bonds in August. We wouldn't be talking about over 1% cushion at this time. We might be talking about 30 basis points.
Gotcha.
But given that time horizon, I think it's conservative and the proper thing to do to have a level of cushion there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so my question is, I know you probably won't want to do this, but the 5% growth is conservative. And I know you don't want to say how conservative, but I mean, you look at the last 10 years of growth, it's been 5.8, and everything that I'm seeing from the local Chamber of Commerce, for example, is really a lot of enthusiasm about days ahead, especially as we're coming out of COVID, and there's a lot of economic activity right now in the Waco area. So I'm curious, how do these numbers change with just bumping that 5% growth estimate to 5.5%?
Okay. I can run that. You know, we changed that growth estimate recently from 3.5 to
Yeah, we
5.
had three
Oh,
and a
you had
half the
three?
last time the board, so the last time Dusty came, we had 3.5, and so we asked him to bump it to 5.
Okay.
Because we thought that was a bit
So I
conservative.
guess that answers my question about
Yeah.
how conservative the 5 is, huh?
Well,
Not as conservative as the 3.5.
If we go back to page 8, right, where we looked at the history of the tax base, you know, if we look at the tax base growth over the previous 5 years, it's grown at an average rate of about 6.5% per year and 5.8% per year over that 10-year time frame. So 5% is somewhat conservative, but it's not worlds conservative. If we were to have another hiccup, maybe things don't come in as fast as we thought. But I would say that moving it to 5.5% could potentially peel off another, I'm going to throw out a number that could be wrong, but could peel off another 1/4 cent per scenario, or that sort of thing, maybe a half cent per scenario, that sort of thing. I don't think it moves the needle by tremendous amounts, but it is something it is something that if you guys, it's your direction, if that's what you want me to do, I'm happy to do it.
And then the other number is also that average home price, which my understanding is also increasing. I can't remember what Bob Templeton, or is this Bob Templeton's number that we saw last week?
I don't recall if it's Bob Templeton's number or not. Your number was 117, I think. I will go back and
remember,
check that. Is that the same?
average,
No,
average
it's all the same
taxable
question, though, isn't it?
value. So that's,
It is.
that would be a home with a market value of approximately $140,000,
Okay,
right? Because of the $25,000 homestead exemption.
Okay, thank you.
Should be
Thanks for
pretty
that.
close.
Thank you for that clarification. Others have questions?
Would you all like us to change that 5%, move that up to 5.5 versus 6% to see if there's a change? Or are you comfortable with 5?
I think right now, you know, we're going to be talking about this all summer. So that gives more time for you, and then gets closer and closer to if we make the decision to call a bond in
Well,
August.
The thing that I think is going to be really interesting is as we get closer to your certification date, if we do end up with a little bit of actual growth in the upcoming fiscal year, that would be great to be able to go ahead and put that growth in if that materializes.
That'd be good.
So, I mean, that's 5% compounded until an expected initial issue date in 2023?
Correct.
And then the number is good for, and the estimates on the impact on taxes, well, that actually stays the same.
It stays the same.
Their taxes
This
could still go up, but the INS rate would go down in
Yeah.
response to an increase in appraised value.
Correct. For instance, if after our analysis assumed that at some point the tax base growth would stop, and so presumably at that point, as tax base growth continues, there could be the opportunity to then at that point lower that INS tax rate after 3, 4, 5 years.
Right, okay.
And one more question about growth. Do you use past data for your assumptions, as opposed to you don't look at economic forecasts?
If we've got access to really good forecasts that a district feels really strongly about, then yes, we would use that. For instance, Tesla is coming up in Del Valley right now, right? The massive plant. That is something that is a big piece of property with a fairly well-known amount of assessed valuation that's to be added. So you have an ability to go, that's coming in there. We could, predict some growth on top of that. So if we had something, similar to that, we know that these really big projects are coming in. I think that absolutely makes some sense to consider it.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? No?
So.
Yes, Mr. Dupuy.
I don't understand the principle. You know what, Dusty, I'm not going to do this to them. I would do it to you, but we'll
all right.
I'll email
we'll talk about it.
Is this a sidebar?
Very good. Okay.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank
Great to
you,
be
Des.
here. And if any other questions come up, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Since this is related to the work of the Community Advisory Committee, this agenda is just kind of it's just moving all over the place. So I'd like to go ahead and review and discuss the long-range facilities planning, which both of our new board members have been a part of since January, and thankful for their participation in that group, so that y'all are both familiar with the work of the committee. But, and you're familiar, Mr. Davis, because you've been here at meetings. But since we began the process, the board's been discussing, or we've posted an item for the board to just reflect on how it's going, maybe other questions or comments you've had from members of the community or members of the committee since our last meeting. So you're free to share any particular thoughts you have on the process today.
I personally think the process went great so far. I think it was a very diverse group of people from our community that got to give much needed input. So I was just happy to see how our community engaged in the process, and just look forward to the great things to come.
I don't have anything to add.
Well, I think that we have really had great participation. It continues, and we only have one more meeting.
Yeah, I might add a couple of things to the conversation. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate for everyone who has been involved. This has been months of meetings, and so, I really appreciate the time commitment that people have put forth to attend these meetings, because they're, usually it's 6:30 to 8, and, you're pushing, shoveling in dinner and trying to get on the call, and I know that's not just me. I would assume that pressure is for everyone as they're joining, and so I just really appreciate the commitment, the time that people have invested into giving feedback into the district and the future of our district. I think I want to echo what Mr. Davis has said. There really has been just some valuable information that has been gathered that I think is really, and I appreciate the structure of it. I appreciate that we do have diversity in every realm within this committee, and I think that is not only important, it's vital, and it's necessary if we're going to move forward. So I appreciate that. Just want to say that.
Thank you. So I might mention that last meeting is on May the 24th. We do have Dusty scheduled to give a similar presentation to the Community Advisory Committee. Then we're going to spend some time, our architects have planned some opportunity to get feedback on the committee regarding the tax impact, as well as helping us with prioritizing some of those projects. So we're looking forward to that meeting. Then I'd also mention, since we're talking about facilities master planning, that we've had our first design meeting for the rebuild of Waco High School. The board approved a resolution to reimburse the district for design fees so that we could get started thinking about the design of a new Waco High School so that as when the bond passes and we sell the bonds, then we can move forward more quickly with the rebuild of the campus. So design work takes a while on a project this big, and so it's important for us to start moving. And we do have a group going to look at some campuses tomorrow in Belton and Austin area. So we'll be going with our architects to take a look, and then coming back at the end of the month, our architects will be spending some time with teachers from all kinds of areas of the high school to talk about what they might want to see in a new Waco High School. So we've got core content in athletics and fine arts and every program represented, and that will be a couple of weeks there that they'll work through that. So we're excited.
And is there, if a member of the board wanted to join on any of these tours, will it be an opportunity?
We're leaving at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, so you need to let me know so we can figure out car arrangements. So if anyone wanted to tag along, as long as we didn't have a quorum, we'd be happy to have you join or meet us there. Happy to have you. We're going to look at 3 schools tomorrow.
It's a bit surreal to talk about a new Waco High School.
We're moving quickly.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, anybody else have anything else about the long-range facilities planning before we move on? Yes, sir. Mr. Guillory.
During these meetings, it's needless to say we need a new Waco High School, and we do need the community to get behind us and back us on this. That's what the conversation's been about since we've started. Like Stephanie was just talking about, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to look at the elementary school level, but we know that we need to get a new Waco High School, and we know that we need a new Carver Middle School, and I'm excited to see these things on deck. So.
Yes, it is very exciting. Okay. Ms. Davis, since we're talking numbers, that makes the most sense. Yes.
And we'll be talking a little bit about some property values here too, because that's the main purpose of this meeting for our budget anyway. We are required under financial accountability to talk about those preliminary property values and how they correspond to our state values and our state funding. So we wanted to remind you a couple little things first. We're going to talk a little bit about our ADA. We'll start with slide 4. I just want to point out one number. The bottom number there, that's 77.6. This is what we need for the 6 weeks of this year to be held harmless for the second semester. So this is critical for us to get to this 77.6%. We are ahead of that at the 4th 6 weeks, but we got to keep that up. So the next page shows the impact of how it might be if we were not able to achieve that ADA. So as I said, we are at about 84.2% in the 4th 6 weeks. You can see in that column that says without the hold harmless, if we were to be funded based on what we're actually getting in ADA this year, we would lose $8.2 million. We know that we have qualified for the first 3 6 weeks of the year. We automatically got the first 2 6 weeks hold harmless. We met the criteria for the third 6 weeks, so we're good for the first 3 6 weeks. The second semester is all one lump decision, and it's going to be based on what we get in the 6 weeks. And so we have to beat that 77.6%. If we get that hold harmless for the entire year, we will actually generate $1.8 million more than what we budgeted, because those numbers were higher than what we expected to get in ADA. So if we just get the first 3 6 weeks, you can see that's that next to last column, we would still lose about $3.7 million from what we budgeted this year. But if we can get that second 6 weeks or second semester, we'll be up 1.8 million. So it's really critical that we get kids in school for the last 6 weeks. It's going to cost us about $5 million. So, you know. Anyway, so looking a little bit on the next slide, just kind of these are early projections on where it looks like we're going to end up. Right now, remember, we did budget for the Paul Tyson Stadium out of our general fund. That was about $9.4 million. And we went into this year with a $5 million deficit, mainly because of those extra 10 days of instruction. That was about $3.5 million of that deficit, because we had, we delayed the calendar, we pushed the calendar, started school later, we end up with more days in this year to pay. So we ended up with a positive balance last year, but started with a deficit this year. But at this point, it looks like we're going to be have a deficit, and it's not a deficit unless you wipe out your fund balance, but we're going to have expenditures over revenues of about $9 million, which is about the cost of the Paul Tyson Stadium. So we're going to make up that $5 million deficit. A lot of areas we've talked about before, substitute costs have been really low this year with remote instruction. I mean, we've had savings in other areas. We haven't filled positions that have become vacant. We've looked at that, and when we didn't need it for a campus because of low numbers, we weren't filling positions. On the next slide, it looks at some of our additional revenues that we've generated this year. Our guys have done a great job, our maintenance guys, of going out on some insurance recovery. Last April of 2020, there was some hail damage. We're going to get about $800,000 in insurance recovery for that to do some HVAC projects. And then on our winter storm damage, we're going to get about $630,000. This is what the adjuster is saying right now on these two numbers. If our actual costs come in lower, we might get a little bit less. If they come in higher, we will get more. But we're slated to get about $631,000 for the winter storm damage. That's a little more firm number than the first one. The first one more depends on our bids. We have also applied for the Coronavirus Relief Fund through the Texas Department of Emergency Management. We're getting $256,000 there that we already received. And then in our special, these don't impact our general fund as much, but in our special revenue funds, through some of those coronavirus relief funds, through the bulk purchase program, we got about $600,000 to buy technology. We also, on our prior purchase reimbursement for student devices, we got about $690,000. And then on ESSER 1, as we talked about last year, we got about $5.1 million, but they reduced our foundation school program money by about $4.7 million. So we netted about $400,000 out of the ESSER 1. So looking on the next page, this is ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. So the district right now has an allotment under ESSER 2. We don't really have timelines on this at this point. This one has not been allocated at all or distributed at all, but we are slated to get $22.1 million for ESSER 2. For ESSER 3, we are supposed to get right at $50 million. This is based on our Title I counts. We did get notified last week that they were distributing 33.2, which is 2/3 of that money in this first go-round of the grant. And then by the end of the summer is what they're saying right now, we should get the other third, which will be another $16 million. Now, there is a bill in front of the legislature right now that is HB 1525 that would give the commissioner the ability to require us to supplant some of our local money and extend the period which we would spend this. And we would have to, and if we do that, we're going to have to put any of those funds that we supplant out of our local money into a reserve or designated fund balance and show that we're going to spend that for that purpose in the out years, in year 4 and 5. So that's kind of changing in the last couple of days. We're still watching to see what happens with that.
So what do they want us to spend that money on right now?
Well, currently, under the law, it's very flexible, and we can supplant, which is a lot of times in federal funds, you can't.
Practically anything in M&O?
No, not anything. About 20% of it has to be spent for learning recovery. And then we can actually do some like indoor air quality, so HVAC projects. It's very flexible in a lot of ways on what we can spend. I don't think that we can, build a stadium.
We've got one. It's and a scoreboard. We're good.
A scoreboard. But, there's a lot that we'll be able to do, especially with social emotional learning, things.
We've been actively working on our stimulus plan, and I'll be actually providing a public hearing on that, a presentation on that at the May 27th meeting, so that you all can provide some input and the public can provide some input into the use of the first $33 million.
So getting on to the next slide on our local property values.
That's the biggest part that I had a misunderstanding.
As Dusty said, our initial values that came in right now are a little bit less than what our preliminary values were last year. I have 21 years worth of data now that I'm tracking, and not once in 21 years have our certified values been higher than our preliminary values. They've always gone down. So basically using that same pattern, I used a 2.75 decline, which is the average of the last 10 years, to come up with a certified value, and that's what I'm using right now to do some of my projections for revenues for next year. But that would bring us about $7.2 billion, which is about 30 million less than what it was for last year. So this is the first time in a very long time that we have had a decline. It's only about 2 other years, I think, in all of the years I track, that we actually had a decline in values, in certified values between years. And I think that was in 2004 and 2009, perhaps. So it does look like Dusty's using a flat number in what he's giving you, but it looks like it's going to be real close to being flat for certified values, mostly in commercial property. Our residential went up.
Is that where the drop is?
Yes.
Come on, yeah, okay.
Commercial and personal. Commercial, personal.
Personal property.
Yeah, so.
Residential, still climbing.
Residential still climbing, yes.
As best I can tell.
So, and you can see down there the bottom of where we are for rates for the last, and we've talked about, the prior year went up about 4.4, went down, and we've talked a little bit about, we've had some lawsuits that have actually, and some late appeals that are not in our certified values, and if you recall last year, it was such a mess, we didn't even have certified values in July as we usually do. We were given a certified estimate because the chief appraiser could not certify at the required 95% on July 25th when he's supposed to. So he was not actually able to certify our values until September 10th. So we were running late last year with those numbers. The next slide. So this is the discussion that we have to have for our school first rating, which is still in the school first rating, and we have to discuss the state funding lag, which no longer exists, because with House Bill 3, we are now on current year values for state funding values rather than lagging 1 year, which really makes it difficult to estimate what our revenue is going to be, because not only do we not have our local values, but we have to estimate local values and then estimate state values. So the values that we are going to use now are going to be current year values, and we have to calculate those state values to actually calculate our tax rate. And the differences in the values are mostly in deductions. There's not a lot of difference in the actual values, a little bit in some of the ag property when we have some losses there. But the main differences are local exemptions for the Freeport exemption, leased vehicles, pollution control, solar energy are not given to us in the state, but then the state gives us some deductions that's not really given to us locally, like the property that's in the tax reinvestment zone, and then deferred taxes, they give us deductions for that. So the value that we use in calculating our property values to see whether we're a rich district or a poor district, if we have to give money back to the state, and how much our share of the state revenue is, or the calculated revenue, tier 1 revenue is going to be, is what they call the T1 value, and that is going to be about $6.4 billion. And again, that's after all the deductions, so it's a little bit different from that $7 billion number that we were just looking at. So for tax year 2021, the state and local compression of tax rate will apply to the district tier 1 tax rate, because we're still under tax rate compression. Although, since our values are not changing, we will probably have no additional compression for this coming year. The allowed tier 1 tax rate will govern both the M&O tax collections and our local share of the tier 1 funding that we get from the state. And it's important to remember that overall, regardless of how much we get compressed on our local tax rate, it doesn't really impact our total revenue, because the way the system works under HB3, as our local contribution goes down, our state contribution goes up. So, and as our local contribution goes up, our state contribution goes down. So it should basically even out, it just as the difference of who's paying the bill, whether we're paying it locally or the state's picking up the tab. But if you think that we're not paying it with our taxes anyway on the state share, you're sadly mistaken. On our state compression, for this year, last year it was 4.1% was the estimated increase in values. The state comptroller has lowered that this year to 1.84%. And so that is below the 2.5% that's set in law. And so when they calculate our state, there's two steps to this, our state compression and then our local compression. So the state compression will be the minimum of basically this 91.64%, 91.64 cents or 92.23 cents. So it'll be the 91.64 that we had the same as last year. And then when they come down to our local preliminary maximum compressed tax rate, we get the same thing. It's kind of the minimum of, and they'll be the 90.15 cents or 91.54. So 90.15 is exactly the rate we had last year as our compressed rate. Now, because we had the TRE and we had the full 17 cents, we get to add some pennies on top of that 90.15 cents. We have 8 cents of golden pennies still. They kind of did a shift there. Originally those were 6, and the way HB3 worked, it shifted some of those pennies into golden pennies. And so we have 8 cents there, and then in our copper pennies, we have another 5.83 cents. So that will bring our rate to the same rate we had this year for M&O of $1.398. Of course, now our INS rate will go in on top of that, and that is still assuming that we're pretty flat in our values, but our rate should stay the same for this year for the tax rate. It'd be close to. And when we were looking at the tax rates that in Dusty's presentation, Dr. Kincannon had asked a question because I think Belton had the TRE as well, and you see that difference in that compressed rate based on your property values, because Belton's rate is compressed a lot more than Waco ISD's is on that local rate because of those values. So this is the schedule for local property in the tax rate adoption. Between July 18th and August 1st, TEA is going to collect those certified values from us, or like I said, last year was certified estimates. On August 5th, TEA's deadline to certify that tax rate we just talked about. So we don't have some of the ability to change that rate as we have had maybe sometimes in the past, but they will certify that by August 5th. And then, of course, August 21st will be our last day to post a meeting to discuss that budget and tax rate. And August 31st is the deadline to adopt the budget. And then September 30th is the deadline to adopt a tax rate. Looking a little bit just at our base budget going forward, right now we have, as we've looked on the other slide, we have about a $43.7 million beginning fund balance going into next year. Again, that's just a projected estimate. Revenues of $162.1 million up. State revenue is going to be up about $600,000 from this past year. And then our base budget was $161.8. That's without that extra 10 days that we had for teacher salaries. And then we've got some special programs increases, and particularly in special education, where we've identified additional students. So those additional funds, so I said we're up about $600,000 in state revenue, so I'll go into special ed, because that's where our increases is, and we'll have to spend that money in special ed. So,
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Question here.
Cheryl, before you go to the next section, looking at the 2020-2021 general fund projections on the earlier slide, where you've got the includes expenditures for Paul Tyson, CNS, $9.4 million. Did I hear you correctly that your projection of the shortfall of $5 million was probably high?
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is, if that projection is high, based on your hold harmless ADA calculations, does that equate to lesser amount of the $9 million, therefore we'd go into 2021-22 with a higher fund balance?
Well, yes. I mean, we're basically, if we had taken the $9 million plus the $5 million that we adopted, we would be eating down fund balance $14 million.
Right.
And we're only eating it down about $9 million. A lot of it is because of that hold harmless, because we are going to be picking up money there that we didn't expect, plus some of those federal reimbursements that we got in that's going to add to it. So a lot of it's in revenue, that our revenues are higher than we expected, and then we're underspending some.
So you've already factored in the underspending on the fund balance. Thank you.
Yes. And as I said, this is projections as of February, end of February. I was working on March today, and so they're still early, and patterns are different from what they have been in prior years. And so I think what I'm seeing right now in March is not unlike what we're seeing here in February at this point. Anyway.
I was thinking instead of starting at 14,
right.
Deficit, you were starting at 9, then taking another 5 off of that, but you clarified it.
And I am showing Tyson, not so much CNS, but I'm showing Tyson being completed this year. And because we also have a little bit difference in the flow of cash from the city and county that we thought we were going to have.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that's uncertain on exactly where that's going to end up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then other things that we know right now for rate adjustments, there is another increase in teacher retirement. So most of this $437,000 you see here, or about half of it, I guess a little over half of it, is for TRS. Then we've got some transportation and some other contracts, tax collection fees, just a few things like that we already know what those numbers are going to be. So right now that's about $437,000. So we have a base budget of about $163 million, other resources and uses. That number is going to come down because we did look at the day school for the deaf yesterday. I looked at that with Charlotte, and we have lowered the expenditures there by about $250,000. So I think that number is going to be more around $400,000 rather than the $664,000 that go to Guama, Hvac, and the day school for the deaf. But right now it looks like as of this projection, it'd be about 42.8 million in fund balance. But now, that is without some of the additional things that we're looking at. It's also, we have cut or decreased or shifted positions into other things, and so we don't have those in here as yet. HR is working on getting all of that paperwork and getting those numbers into the system so we can take a look at that. And then we have, of course, additional requests that come in, and talking about perhaps salary increases. We did look at group health this week, and it looks like maybe for the 5th year in a row, we may not have to increase our contribution rate for group health. And so we have done a really good job, I think, with that in our insurance plan. So then the next couple of slides just are some salary increase estimates based on where we started out with our positions. And you can see the first one is with the teacher step. People will move up on that, so I do have that in there already, but with 0 increase on the other employee groups, and just the teacher step would be about 672,000. 645 of that hits the general fund at 1% of the midpoint, and then the teacher step is about a 1% increase. It would be about $1.3 million, with $1.1 million of that hitting the general fund. 2% would be about 2.3 million, and a 3% would be about 3.3 million. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like. I know TASB is doing some work on salary schedules and all, and we'll be doing a presentation, but that's just some estimates. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
I'm picking on you, sorry. I got the text message. Oh, Dr. Warren, thank you so much for your patience certainly not intentional that this issue is the last item on our agenda, but important update. To review and discuss the Committee on Race Equity core. You have to remind me of that. Oh, I thought it was something more special, like something secret. Is that what y'all call
it? It is to you.
I will explain. I'll definitely explain as we go through. So I'm here this evening to provide an update on our race equity work, and I'd like to actually start at the very beginning. So in May of 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, that sparked a national outcry, a focus on race in our nation that was really brought to the forefront. And Dr. Kincannon, like many leaders of many different organizations, felt compelled to share a statement with our district employees that was shared through email. And in it, she did 2 things. She stated her personal commitment to doing the work, and she also stated her commitment to making sure that our district became an anti-racist organization. So from that beginning, these words led to actions. And those actions started with some grassroots efforts by a couple of our employees who approached Dr. Kincannon separately, and then she connected them. And they had an idea to have some kind of race equity committee with the intent that the committee would be a source of professional learning, that it would make some policy recommendations, and that it would become a really vibrant forum for race. Similarly, it would be reflective of the unique racial history of Waco and in alignment with our really citywide greater Waco area efforts in terms of race. So from there, we wanted to make sure that this was done with the board's support and full awareness of what we were thinking. And that led to the passing of a board resolution in October of last year. And then that's where we got to CORE. the Committee on Race Equity, and the name conveys how race is now being centered in the work that we're doing. So as we are going about every single thing in a district, we want to be cognizant of the impact and the influence of race. And so in our efforts to do that, we still had to be mindful of the landscape that we were in. And that image of a jumbled box of puzzle pieces kind of reflects what this last year has really been like. So in the midst of ongoing pandemic management, we knew that we needed to be realistic in terms of the bandwidth that our folks had available to them. And so we committed to a soft launch using the volunteers who were basically waiting for an opportunity to have this conversation and to be frontline, the first to come, the first followers in terms of having a formal conversation in the district about race. The soft launch began in February of this year, and we continued to watch the social and economic and political unrest throughout our nation. We continued to see the completely unexpected and unprecedented winter storm and its effect on our community. We also looked at the kinds of challenges that we were facing as we were trying to mobilize tests and then vaccines and remote or face-to-face. And all of these things provided a backdrop that made it difficult, but not impossible for us to move forward. The commitment that the committee members made was that we were going to keep going because this work was important enough and it was not going to be delayed just because the landscape was particularly difficult. So what we did was commit to a series of 6 meetings. Our last one is going to happen at the end of this month. Every meeting had 2 options for attendance, again, in full recognition that folks are stretched thin and they would do their best to catch one or the other of each meeting. We averaged about 10 to 15 participants per meeting. We also, within these meetings, we combined professional learning with skill development. So really looking at preparation for using a race equity lens. And we followed a learning curve of personal awareness and understanding of who you are and how race impacts the work that you do, what you walk into your workspace with as a result of race and how you think about it and feel it and express it. And then recognizing that there is a known skill set associated with race equity work and that could be taught intentionally in practice. And so we went from that personal learning to the skill development that we would need ultimately. We also scheduled 4 podcast studies. These were selected on purpose because podcasts seemed way more accessible than a full-on book study. And all of the podcasts were connected to books, so eventually they may turn into book studies. But we wanted to make sure that the entire district had an opportunity to participate in this conversation about race in some way. And listening to an hour, 45-minute podcast and having a conversation was much more doable than committing to a couple hundred or longer book. We actually have a podcast study happening tomorrow morning if you'd like to join us at 8 o'clock. We'll be talking about Austin Channing Brown on Brene Brown's Unlocking Us podcast. We've also shared resources from a variety of places like the ADL, Learning for Justice, Facing History, and some others. And those resources were shared both for use in the classroom and for personal conversation. So we wanted our committee members to have an opportunity to have these conversations with their colleagues or with family members or with children. And these resources were shared with that in mind. As we are looking forward to 2021, 2022, we want to use CORE really as a launch point for a multi-pronged effort to do several different things, but still with that same intentionality in strategy to make sure that we are staying true to our original intent. We're going to continue the podcast studies. They have proven to be something that is accessible and doable, and we want to bring more and more folks into that. We will also have book studies and other professional learning opportunities that will be available to anyone in the district. We're also going to train a cadre to conduct equity audits. And while we'll talk about this more in the coming months, essentially that's being able to look through the lens of race at who is advantaged or disadvantaged by our systems and processes, and then looking for ways for us to reframe that or replace that, as the case may be, so that all of our students really get what they need. We're going to expand our meetings beyond volunteers to designated campus advocates who will then be charged with bringing the conversation back to their campuses. And we're going to engage our students in the conversation through some pre-established forums like No Place for Hate or student organizations, but we want to make sure that their voice is vibrant and really heard in this conversation. With all of our efforts, we will remain grounded by the district's mission and vision and very laser-like focus on increasing student achievement, because truly everything that we do has to tie back to that. That's it in a nutshell. I believe I have a colleague or two who will be pleased that I kept it under 10 minutes. But I am happy to answer any questions that you might have about our race equity work from this year or as we look forward.
I should say you sold me on the last sentence. Bravo. Tying back to student achievement.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, just
Mr.
more
Davis?
of a statement. One, I want to thank you, Superintendent Kincannon, for your statement that was made after the George Floyd incident. I was an employee at the time, and I definitely appreciated you, how quickly you made the statement and how effective it was. I just thank you for your work. It's needed, and just let me know if it's ever anything I can do to support you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Yes, Ms.
The audits, what does that look like? I know you said you're going to get off into it, but just a little bit about what the audit actually looks like, and then when you recover that data, and what are you looking for?
Well, we take pre-existing data. So, for instance, we could look at our ISS or OSS rates, our in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension rates. That is information that we talk about all the time, and it's in front and center for us at the district level and at the campus level as well. But we have not really talked about it in terms of the disproportionate impact that it has on students of color. And although we have those categories included in the numbers that we track, we haven't had that next step conversation. So if indeed our students of color are being disproportionately affected by in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, what might we do differently? What is it within our processes or our procedures that is leading us to have this kind of impact on our students? That's what an equity audit would do.
How the processes work moving forward?
Good question, Master.
So, would you guys then, after receiving that information from the audits, would you have a say-so in those processes? So if it is ISS or OSS that is negatively affecting students of color, will you have a say-so in how those processes work in our schools? That's my question.
It is CORE's intent to make policy recommendations. So we would bring that to our leadership, to our board, and we would move forward from there. So CORE is not a decision-making body, but they are our analysts, they are our challengers, they are our deep thinkers that really help us look through a race equity lens at what we're doing and how we're doing and the impact that it's having on our campuses, on our students. And then we bring that back so that we can indeed change what needs to be changed.
One more question, I'm done. On the student engagement piece, how do y'all plan on engaging the students in the conversation? Is that something CORE is going to do? Is that like a teacher-led thing? How is that going to work?
I would say a little bit of everything, but really the easiest starting point is what's already in place. So, for instance, this last year, we have several of our campuses who started No Place for Hate, which is a student-led effort to create a respectful, inclusive learning environment. So working with the student groups who are coordinating that effort on their campus, this is a natural extension for them because they're already talking about inclusivity and discrimination and stereotypes and bias. So we would tap into that established forum to gather their thoughts more specifically about race.
Good questions.
We actually wrote a pretty good plan, Dr. Warren and I, and for a previous district for COPS grant that we didn't get, but we have a good plan that we can implement. So,
did you steal it when you left?
We wrote it, so we own it. It's just doing the work. Yeah. Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. Thank you.
I really appreciate your effort to keep, you started and then the momentum and that you're building on it and including more people in the conversation. It appears to me, because I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, so I'm listening to her Unlocking Us, and I'm also listening to her Dare to Lead podcast as well, and the conversations are so rich, but they're really lacking if you don't have a group you can talk to about them. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I'd like to be in your group to be able to talk about all these podcasts, because she's most of them have to do with books as well. So I'm buying the books, I'm reading but they don't have anybody to talk to because no one's doing it with me. So what a great group, and thank you for continuing and building on it. It's exciting. Yeah, good. Okay, well, I think that's it. Announcements, I don't know. Usually it's Mr. DeBeer. Yep, thank you, Mr. DeBeer.
Good evening, Madam President. A couple of things that happen between now and your next meeting on the 27th. This weekend, there are some great opportunities for people in our community to get vaccinated against COVID-19, including a clinic that's happening on Saturday in partnership with Carver Park Baptist Church that will have walk-up appointments available. Then when you look to next week, the school board and the city council are holding their intergovernmental meeting on May 19th. On the 20th, we'll have a virtual celebration of our Teachers of the Year, both our outstanding district Teachers of the Year and our first-year Teachers of the Year, and we're looking forward to that as well. And then on the 24th, the week of your next meeting, as several people have mentioned, we have the next and the last in those series of meetings with the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, the Community Advisory Committee doing that work.
I had one more announcement. The Summer Leadership Institute for school board members is scheduled for June 23rd, which is Wednesday night, which is usually the legislative session, then all day the 24th and the 25th, and then usually just a morning session on Saturday. That will be virtual this year, and I assume everyone wants to be signed up for that. So we'll make sure that you're registered. You can just smile and say yes. And we did get an TASB reached out to me today to ask about us hosting some virtual piece of that conference for other school board members from across the state to come to, and so we're going to work with the Service Center ESC 12 to do that. So there will likely be a place for you to go to sit with other board members and participate in that conference if you so choose to do that. And that would be on Thursday and Friday, the 24th and 25th. So we will get you all registered. And I know you've met Monica, but Monica Boyd is our my new executive assistant. She'll be working with the board as well, and Christy will be moving over to supervise our warehouse.
Well, and before we officially adjourn, I want to, of course, again welcome Mr. Guillory, Mr. Davis, and some of you may not realize that there is a lot of training that the state requires, and both these gentlemen already have engaged in training. Mr. Davis, I think, was here 3.5 hours. Sorry, I didn't tell you, he'd been here 3.5 and you were just here an hour and a half, but you've got more coming. Right, so there's a lot, and so these guys are going to be very busy. Yeah, so I'm excited to have you, and good things to come. Anything else for the good of the order? Mr. DeBeer, we're good. Okay, we're adjourned. Night.